Hi, it's Tom from GreenShortz, and this is part 3 of my outdoor water heater using a cob rocket stove with a copper coil in it. And I'm going to upgrade this in 3 different ways. First of all, we're going to upgrade the tank. Going to go vertical with it, going to add pressure as well as some mixing. Secondly, I'm going to move away from this smaller experimental coil in this cob rocket stove, and I'm going to go down to max, and I'm going to go with a larger coil in max. Max, of course, is my flue pipe cob and firebrick rocket stove, which I initially intended to melt aluminum. Didn't work. But I've been thinking about trying to figure out a good way to use max, because as a rocket stove, it functions really well. An initial idea I had was to put a coil inside it, and so that's in fact what I'm going to do. I'm going to run it to the tank, which is going to be mounted over here. I'm going to start by taking the tank down, and I'll take it down to the garage. You may be wondering why I'm building an outdoor shower in freezing temperatures. Didn't start out that way, but now I'm determined to finish it. I'm going to start by pulling apart the tank, the fittings that I didn't glue. I'm going to salvage some elements of this assembly. And I'll unscrew this and cut here and here by losing these elements here, but I'll keep the valve, that fitting, and this T. And I'll have enough space here to put a coupling on. Alright, now I'm going to put together the shower head assembly. And because I'm going pressurized this time, I'll be using primer in addition to glue. I've cut these sections of pipe just long enough to allow the joints to collapse right onto each other. I'm going to use this T to bring in some straight cold water from the bottom of the tank. It'll allow me to do some mixing between the hot water coming in here to allow it to balance the temperature a little bit. The mixing valve is optional here, but just a precaution in case I'm heating this water up a little too hot. I got that suggestion out of the comments, and so I appreciate your feedback. The threaded bushing here, and our connector. Let's prime this up. For our threaded joints, we're going to be using Teflon tape, and I got a reminder in the comments that we're going to be wrapping this in the opposite direction of how we'll be threading it. So threading this way, so I'm going to be wrapping this way. That way it doesn't undo our wrap as we're threading it in. Thanks for the feedback. To finish out the top end of the tank here, I'm going to put in just a ring and a cap. Rather than buy a whole new section of pipe, I'm just using a small piece off of a piece that I already had. That's why it's dirty. You don't see it anyway. I'm going to twist that till it starts to grip, and then that's a nice tight joint. Now I'm going to have a little bit of an air gap up here, but the pressure itself will close that up a little bit, since water has a higher pressure density than air, but it won't matter. It'll be enough water level in here to feed out through this pipe. Alright, now we're going to put in the mixing valve line. I'm actually going to bend that back toward the main part of the tank with some 45s. Train's coming. A little harder to hear inside the garage. gonna have this valve come into the side. Check for square. Alright, so there's the top of the tank with our mixing valve included. This will probably come in at a little bit of an angle to let a limited amount of water through. Again, only when I need it to cool off the hot water. Now I'm going to attach a 2-foot section of 4-inch PVC to the top end of the tank. Alright, so the top end of the shower, a little more elegant than the last version. The last element I'm going to add to the top of the tank here is a thermometer. And I'm going with an analog thermometer just because I don't want to worry about batteries. I'm going to drill a hole and put this in the top of the water where it will be the hottest. I'm going to drill this hole a little small and then use some PVC cement to push the thermometer in. Dip a little primer on this because it actually softens the PVC a little bit. I put this through the joint here so I'd have more surface area on that hole. The thickness of the pipe and the thickness of the coupling. Now I'm going to hook up the bottom of the tank. I'm going to use this hose bib with a 1/2-inch thread to be where I hook up the garden hose for the pressure line for the tank. But I also want this to be the drain, so it needs to be at the lowest point. So I'm actually going to put this coupling here and move the outlet line for the cold water over to here, and then put the 1/2-inch hose fitting here. I've got 3/4 inch thread in here, so I've got a adapter that goes from 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch to accept that. And I'm going to move this fitting over to this 3/4 inch thread here. Alright, let's do that assembly. The only way I could get to 3/4 inch out of 1 1/4 inch was to use this bushing to step it down. I'm sure there's a single part that would do that, but I couldn't find it. Too much on that. On the top of this T, I'm going to go with a 1 1/4 to 3/4 inch bushing. And finally the 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch thread, which will receive the hose bib. And then on the cold water output side, I'm going to use a 3/4 inch threaded elbow, which has a 3/4 inch thread to receive the barbed fitting. And to finish out the bottom of the tank, we'll add the barbed fitting. Alright, and there's the bottom of the tank. Cold water out, mixing valve up, hose fitting for our pressure, plus the drain. I will probably need to pull the hose in the winter because there will be a little bit of water down in this section that won't drain out the bottom here. It would probably freeze and break this fitting, so I'll have to do that. There may have been a simpler way to do this, but this is what I've got. And now we'll fit up the center portion of the tank. Much simpler assembly here with a 2-inch bushing to 3/4 inch thread, our 3/4 inch threaded elbow, and the barbed fitting. Alright, and the center portion of the tank is done. I'm actually going to go ahead and move outside to the location of the shower to put the tank together. I'm going to start by adding some mounting brackets for the tank. And behind that small strip of wood is actually a 4x4. that supports the wall outside. That will be the structure I'll be screwing into. It's gonna sit down on this 2x4 for support. Alright, I'm going to mount the bottom half of the tank. I'm going to modify the 2 brackets I used for the first setup to hold the tank vertically. And that just involves shortening them and drilling a couple of holes. I want the shower head coming out at a 45-degree angle to the corner up top. So I'm going to rotate this so it's matching that angle here on the bottom. I need one more spacer here on the 2x4. Alright, now I'm going to add the center fitting for the tank. So my coil is going to be coming in from this direction, so I'm going to put the center portion on like this, with our fitting coming out toward the stove. Now I'm going to add the top of the tank. I'm going to test fit this first. Alright, it's good to go. Let's put it in. Alright, now that the tank's in, I'm going to put in my mixing tube from the bottom to the top. Alright, so the tank is set up. Now it's time to make the coil. While we're looking at it from this angle, note that the hot water inlet on this tank is in the middle. I had a comment that suggested that I do that because that allows the hot water to mix with a column of cold water as it rises, just to avoid that thermal layering, which could result in getting scalded. In a comment on the first build, No More Martinez Ortiz noted that I probably would need a longer coil, at least 20 feet, he said. So I am doubling the length of the coil to a 20-foot section of copper. And John Sutherland also commented that a conical shape of open coils in the chimney would perhaps pick up more heat. And John, I like that idea, so I'm actually going to use your suggestion. We're going to do open coils in the chimney, and they're going to be conical. So in other words, they're going to taper to a tighter coil as they move toward the top, channeling the heat in that cone as it goes up, capturing more of it. We're also going to leave them open in the chimney, so they're not going to be embedded in the cob in the outside. They'll be free floating inside the chimney itself. So all sides of the coil exposed to heat. And a lot of you were concerned that the copper might melt. If this copper were not to have water in it, it would certainly melt in the temperatures inside a rocket stove. Although when I was a Boy Scout, we actually got water to boil inside a styrofoam cup in an open fire. The water was so much more of a better heat sink that it pulled the heat right through that foam into the water, boiling it before the foam melted. So I'm confident the water inside the copper is going to do the same thing, as long as we keep that coil full of water. I think I'm going to leave the tips on when I bend this, just to keep it from getting damaged. So I need a straight section to get it out of the stove. And then we'll start our bend. This is the pipe that we use to form the inside of Max's chimney. So I'm going to use this as a guide as I bend up this coil. slight conical shape going here. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get it much tighter than that though. Definitely feeling more resistance as it's bending. Let's see how this fits in before I bend it up anymore. So I actually forgot that the circumference of that large pipe was just for the top foot of the chimney of the stove, and the next section down is much more narrow, probably more like a 8-inch. So the widest part of my coil is actually too big to fit down into the bottom of the chimney. What I think I'm going to do is invert the coil. So instead of like this with the wide part at the bottom, I'm going to invert it so that the narrow part is at the bottom. And I think that's going to work just fine. I'm going to finish bending this up. Alright, so here's the coil. Almost conical. Definitely more taper down here on the bottom. And it widens as we get to the top. Then I've got my leader here to come out through the side of the stove where we'll hook up the cold water line. And then a straight section here at the top as well, where we'll connect the hot water line to the tank. Looks like about a 2.5 foot section of coil here, which will be about the full length of the chimney. I'm happy about that because I don't have to drill through the side of the flue pipe in order to get this coil out of the stove. It'll also make it easier to replace the coil if and when it wears out or fails. I'm going to start by removing the 2 pieces of rebar that the crucible sat on in this chimney. This cobb's been sitting out in the rain a little bit, so it's fairly soft. Let's do a quick test fit for the coil. Alright, looks pretty good. Actually, I think what I might do is shave off a little bit of the inside of the chimney, certainly in the middle section, to allow for more fire outside the coil. I'm going to bring the coil out right here, and thankfully this brick is a little bit loose, so I'm going to pull that out. Thankfully there's a layer of cob here above the fire brick before the chimney flue starts that I can tunnel through without having to drill through a brick. Now I'll lower the coil in and feed it out through the hole, which is easier said than done. Retrofitting is always more difficult than purpose-built. Alright, I think I got it. I think I'm going to just pull this whole brick out. The stove should be okay. It's supported on the inside. Make more room for this coil here. So I need to straighten this out just a little bit to get it to stick out just a little bit further so I can attach the hose. With the inlet part of the coil positioned, I'm going to fill in this hole with some cobb. Putting pressure with my other hand on the inside of the stove. Put a brick onto the front corner for now. Now there's the train. I'll just probably cob in this gap for right now. I need to undo the coil just a little bit to bring the copper out this side instead of the way it's pointing now. It puts it right in alignment with the hot water section. It's bright out. Remember how I said I was making this in freezing temperatures? Well, actually here in late November in Georgia, today the high is 72 Fahrenheit. I might actually be able to use this shower today. Another advantage of this particular location for the shower, in addition to privacy, is that the tank, as you can see right now, is in full sunlight. I had a comment from Kessel Katzi out of Germany who suggested that I could warm the water with the heat of the sun as well, simply by painting the tank black, which I will do as the last step in the process. Vielen Dank, meine Freund. Alright, now that the coil is in, I'm gonna hook up the hoses. Turns out 3/8 inner diameter and 3/8 outer diameter are quite different. So I'm using some bicycle inner tube to make a gasket for the copper connections here. Using the lightest pressure here to work that off. I don't want to change the circle. Got a little slit cut in the inner tube. I'm going to push this inside the hose. Attempt to push this inside the hose. Work that over the copper till I can see the copper pushing through the slit inside. And I can clamp down over the part with the inner tube. And hopefully this will hold. I may have to do an official reducer using a shark bite or something like that to make this work, but for now, for our testing purposes, hopefully this will hold. I'll connect the hot water side to the tank. Alright, the hoses are hooked up. Now we pressure test. The end of the hose and the hose bib are male to male. I've made a short section of hose that's got 2 female connections. So I'm going to use that to connect the hose. I'm going to set the valve to off and go turn on the hose. We'll see how this holds up for leakage. A little drip there. Let me see if I can't tighten it up a little. I'll go ahead and open this valve and fill the tank. Alright, water's coming up here. I need to see water at this point in the hose to know that the coil is full. So it's running down from the top there. Alright, we got water coming out of the shower head. A decent pressure there. Although the cap seems to be leaking pretty bad. I'm going to lower the pressure valve on the bottom and see if that helps with the leakage. It just seems to be the cap joint that's leaking. Alright, I'm going to turn off the shower head and turn off the pressure, and then we'll heat it up. I just checked the ambient temperature of the water coming out of the house, and it's about 66 degrees. So I'm going to calibrate this thermometer to 66. Didn't realize it would be upside down when I installed it like that. Oh well. Alright, now let's get a fire going. Still pretty smoky out of the top. As the fire gets hotter, we'll see that smoke clear up. Our problem is boiling the water out the top of here. Need to pressurize again. Alright, so I pressurized and blew the hose. That's not good. Look at the coil. I've got it coming out the top here because we blew that line. I gotta keep the hose on until the fire dies down so I don't lose my copper. That water's too hot to touch. Need some water to put this out. The water coming out of the coil is cooled down significantly, so turn the water off. A quick lesson from this one. The pressure increase from the heat is probably too much for the system. I need to keep the shower head open to relieve that pressure, at least while we're heating up. So also those inner tube connections just weren't strong enough. So we'll have to get the shark bites in a proper conversion from the 3/8 outer diameter to the 3/8 inner diameter. Alright, so it's the next day, Thanksgiving Day. Happy Thanksgiving. And I've had a little bit of time to think this through a little bit more. So I think this joint failed because the heat expanded the hose a little bit and loosened things up and it popped off. I do think the pressure was a factor in this also. So because it is in fact Thanksgiving Day, the Home Depot is closed, and so I can't get the shark bite fittings that I think would be the right way to make this connection. But I'm determined to finish the video. So I'm actually gonna make a better connection with the inner tube here. Gonna put multiple hose clamps on this, and I'm also gonna do two additional things. Number one, I'm gonna open the shower head valve while we're warming it up in case there's any additional pressure can bleed off that way. I'm also gonna make a smaller fire because I do think one thing that was quite obvious about this exposed coil is that it picks up heat a lot faster. Alright, so let's make these connections and then we'll do test number 2. Got a longer section of inner tube here. And I'm actually going to cut this to fit. It's probably a better tape than duct tape for this, that's for sure. If I didn't have any electrical tape, that might have been a better option. I'm going to put my extra clamps on before I put this on. 3 ought to do it. Alright, this is getting pretty tight. Obviously as it goes down further, it's just the friction's increasing. I've got enough underneath there for 2 clamps, And I'll probably put a third clamp down on the rubber itself just to keep that from sliding. All right, hopefully this will suffice for this particular test. Let's tighten these up. Obviously, I would have preferred to have the third clamp on the hose itself, but I suppose this is helping just a little bit. All right, let's fill the tank back up. As soon as it starts flowing out the shower head, I'm gonna turn off the pressure. All right, turn the water back off. Let the shower head drain out. All right, I'll leave this dripping like this, so I know right where my water level is, right there at the top of the tank. Let's make another fire. It's gonna be a smaller one this time. Seems somewhat contradictory to have a small fire in a big rocket stove, but till I get that pressure thing figured out, we'll have to take it easy. I can feel this getting warmer. One big 2x4 in here will actually burn more slowly than a bunch of small sticks, so the heat should be fairly constant. Definitely getting too hot to touch now. The hose is getting warmer. Got a bubble moving up here. So the coil is definitely producing some current. So observing this now, I'm not convinced it was the increased pressure from the heat that made this pop off. Rather, when I turned the hose pressure back on, that's what popped off my loosened fitting. Thermometer's moving up. Looks like about 80 degrees. I'm gonna increase the fire a little bit here. The temperature rise is definitely going to be slower, given that I've got a whole extra 2 feet of tank that the hot water has to warm. The airflow is just not as good with dimensional lumber like this, like 2x4s. In pine, they just doesn't burn as hot as oak, which all that round wood I was putting in there was oak. Looks like we're approaching 90 degrees. Definitely getting some water boiling in the coil. And that's pushing a little bit of pressure out the top too. The shower head's dripping a little bit. Temperature's up at about 100 now. The hose is warm and it's a little bit softer, but I'm not concerned at all that it's gonna melt. You can see some bubbles going up. I'm happy with the water temperature right now, and so I'm gonna shut this fire down and fire up the shower. All right, so my final temperature is about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which should be plenty comfortable for a warm shower. So I've got the shower head open, and I'm gonna turn on the hose pressure again. My tank is still pretty leaky, but I'll have to deal with that later. So in the end, I'm fairly pleased with this project. The water was pleasantly warm, although I think I probably could have heated up a little bit more of the tank. It went to cold pretty quickly. So I'll need to build a proper surround and a floor, and then it'll be something I can enjoy during the warmer months. But not today. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. As always, our mission here at Green Shorts is to help you see green, so you can be green and save a little green by doing it yourself. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and share. And subscribe for a new GreenShortz DIY video coming soon. Ooh, it's cold now.